Thank you for joining us. We're going to give another minute or two before we get started, just to make sure you're in the right place. This is Land Gifts, the Legacy and Logistics with the Vermont Land Trust. Kind of like getting on a plane and making sure you're going in the right direction. Well, I'm thinking that since this is recorded, probably makes sense for us to be timely since we have so much information to cover. So I'm going to kick it off. I want to welcome everyone who's joining us today on their lunch hour. It's a beautiful sunny day in Vermont, which has been a little extraordinary lately. So we'll make it snappy and get right to the subject. Thank you for joining us. I'm Krista Kemp. I'm the Donor Relations Director for the Vermont Land Trust. I'm responsible for major gifts, plan gifts, and land gifts. And I've been with the Land Trust for 12 years. We will be talking today about land gifts, the Land Trust. We want this to be an open, conversational kind of panel discussion. I'm going to be moderating the panel, and we encourage questions as we go. Please type those into the Q&A section, not the chat section. That way we'll easily be able to keep up with them and answer them as we move along. We really look forward to your questions. They tend to drive meaningful and rich conversation about the topic. So let's run it that way. And then also, our session is being recorded today, and it'll be available on YouTube. We'll send you a note when it's posted. So without further ado, I have an expert panel joining me today, and I'm really excited about introducing them to you. Our first panelist is Donald Campbell. He is our project director in the Southwest region. He lives in Bennington, and he's been with the Land Trust for over 20 years. So thank you for joining us, Donald. Next is Chris Moore. He is our GIS director. He works in our Montpelier office, and he also has been with the Vermont Land Trust for over 20 years. Maya Sutton-Smith is our events manager and technical guru online with the call today. She's been with us for 2 years, and I'm really happy that she's managing everything behind the curtain today. And then lastly, we have an esteemed attorney, Benjamin Putnam, Benj, as we like to call him. He's joining us today from his law office of Putnam and Menard in Middlebury, Vermont. And he has been in practicing law for 18 years. So we have deep, rich experience on our call today. Next, I'd like to share with you just an overview of what we'll be talking about. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Vermont Land Trust, of the types of gifts we accept, the timeline and process for making a gift, who considers gifts of land and why, ways to accomplish your gift, tax implications of those gifts, and the legacy of a land gift and what it can mean to the Vermont Land Trust and to our beautiful state. So, kicking off the conversation, I'm really delighted to have you here. And I think of all of you out there as kind of the friends and family, or the choir, if you will, of Land Trust partners and friends. So you probably know a lot about the Land Trust, but maybe there are a few things you don't know. I'm first really excited to share with you that we're 46 years old. And that's actually considered middle age. I don't know if anybody knows that, but I feel like the Land Trust is gaining wisdom with every year that we exist. And certainly, like many of you who are in land trusts, understand the complexities of conservation grow every year. And our organization also is growing every year, and understanding and working with some of the challenges that we couldn't have even imagined would have happened 46 years ago. So with that 46 years brings 45 employees. We are spread out across the state in 5 offices, and each of these people is a subject expert in their category, and they carry deep passion for the work. I'm sure if any of you have connected with any of our people on the ground, you'll know exactly what I mean. To this date, we've conserved almost 640,000 acres in Vermont, and just last year, we conserved 14,300. We protect land and we foster connections to farms, farmers, forests, foresters, and community spaces. And we can only do that work with broad and enduring support. And over the years, we've discovered the gifts of land have been an integral part of and component of that. So without further ado, let's dive into the meat of what we're here to talk about today. I want to first focus on types of gifts, the types of gifts we accept, and how we move forward in the process. So we at the Land Trust consider gifts of land in 2 categories. Lands that have deep conservation attributes and may end up in the end with a municipality, with the state, or with another land trust. Or there are gifts of land that could be given to us purely with a financial intent, that the donor expects that we'll accept the property, sell it, and use the net proceeds from the sale of the property to fund future conservation work. And I'm going to ask now my colleague Donald if you might highlight a couple of projects that you can think of that have bridged those categories.
Thanks, Krista. It's a fairly specific slice of the question that we're talking about today, but there are a huge variety of ways these things can happen. Probably the most common way this happens is that somebody has a piece of property and they may not have a lot of heirs that are particularly interested in that property, but they want to see the property kind of stay the way it is and be available to the world in the way that it has been for a long time after their time. And so they'll work with us to make a gift either during their life or sometimes after their lifetime. So, for example, I have a friend in, I'll leave her anonymous, but I have a donor friend now in Arlington who very much supported the Land Trust work. She has a couple 100 acres in Arlington, and she was particularly interested in the fact that the bears used her property so much, and it's a very high use area for the bears moving between the Taconics and the Green Mountains, and she's very much into animals and what the animals' needs were. So she conserved her land with Vermont Land Trust. That is a whole nother webinar. But she put a permanent conservation easement on her land. After having done that and lived with that for several years, she decided she didn't have any heirs, and she decided that she wanted to gift us the property. And so she gifted us the entire property, and she retained a life estate. So she continues to live there, and she continues to pay the taxes, and she continues to maintain the place. Although technically, at this point, VLT owns it. So after her time, we will own a conserved property with a house on it, which we will then sell as a way to increase our work, but also as a way to maintain our perpetual relationship to the land through the conservation easement.
That's a great example.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than some because it was a 2-step process, a little bit like getting into cold water, kind of only go up to your ankle first and then go in a little deeper later. But sometimes this happens differently. There are times when it is a surprise to us. We of course try to avoid that if possible. but every once in a while somebody will die and we'll find that in their will they've made provisions. So for example, up in the Pollitt area, a woman died and she left her land in equal parts to the Dorset Nursing Association and the Vermont Land Trust. And so we worked with the Dorset Nursing Association to put a conservation easement on that property, and to resell the property and to support both of our missions. There are other instances we could talk about that look more like somebody has a few hundred acres that abut the Forest Service land, and they really want to move that along, but they don't have time to go through the whole Forest Service process, which can be quite lengthy and involve years of sort of studies and looking at things. And so they might turn land over to us or to another conservation organization. Honestly, there are many that do this, like the Nature Conservancy and other good partners that we have. So people might donate a conservation easement to us, and in that particular case, I mean, donate the land to us. In that particular case, we might not put a conservation easement on it because if the Forest Service is the eventual goal for that land, they don't like to own land that has a conservation easement on it. So there are times when we have to think about the eventual outcome of the land and where this land is going to kind of end up at the end of the day, and that is pretty much what dictates whether or not we conserve it and how we conserve it.
I think I'd like to jump back just for a second to clarify, because I know sometimes people confuse donating a conservation easement with actually donating land.
All the time.
They confuse that. And so can you clarify the difference between donating an easement versus donating your land? Like, do you still own the land when you have an easement on it?
Yeah, the easement is really a whole other webinar, but I forgive me for muddying the waters a little bit with that, but the conservation easement is our primary legal tool that protects land for perpetuity. So when somebody puts a conservation easement on land, regardless of who owns it, that conservation easement stays with the land forever. And that conservation easement does certain things like protect it from being subdivided and protect it from being inappropriately clear cut or developed or things like that. So a conservation easement is a series of rights that come with the land, and those rights can be transferred to a conservation organization like Vermont Land Trust. So sometimes people own land, they donate a conservation easement to us, but they continue to own the land. They continue to pay the taxes. They continue to be able to buy it or sell it, to sell the land or give it to their heirs or add on to it. But we have a conservation easement on those original acres. Then in other times, people give us the actual land itself, and that may or may not have a conservation easement on the fee land and the fee interest in land. And when that's the case, they may or may not retain the right to live on that land for a while, but the land actually becomes owned by Vermont Land Trust. It's very, very common for people to donate a conservation easement and then get confused about, I gave my land to VLT, and it's not the case. When you donate a conservation easement, you transfer certain legal rights to your land to the Vermont Land Trust, but you continue to actually own the underlying land yourself. Is that more than you wanted, Krista?
Primo. Thank you. That makes it really, really clear. And I think it will also really clarify for people on the call. So that sort of segues into our next topic of like, what kind of land are we looking for? What might we consider? And in the time that I've been on the at the Land Trust, I've been kind of the point person for taking those incoming calls, and I've had the gamut. I've had people call me with a quarter of an acre under an underpass with a Superfund site on it. And I've also had people call me with, multiple hundreds of acres of forest land with all kinds of conservation attributes. And so what I can share with the people on the call is that we have in the past sort of put a guideline on what makes fiduciary and financial sense for the financial gifts, and then what has the best possible conservation outcome for the conservation gifts. And then there's always this muddy middle where we try to figure out the best possible outcome for the donor and their heirs, and for the organization, and for Vermont. So where we've stood in the past, and we're sort of shifting a little for the future, is that we've looked at parcels as small as 50 acres that may produce a net income of $50,000. And we've been looking at those numbers over the years and sort of changing them to adapt to what things cost now, where the parcel's located, if there's other conservation land around it. And then also, interestingly, there's been a development of an organization called the Realty Gift Fund. And it's a nonprofit organization that actually takes responsibility for accepting and disposing of property. And by disposing, I mean selling, not wrecking it. But they will work with organizations so that land trusts, and I'm basically speaking to the other land trusts who are much smaller than us and not as filled out with legal capacity and other organizational strength, that can make accepting gifts of land possible for you. And they can also make accepting things that are out of your realm. Like, we would never consider accepting a hotel, but if a donor is interested in using that to make a financial gift to the land trust, this other organization could be helpful with that. So what that means is basically the door is wide open. Give us a call and let us know what you're thinking and how your gift might fit into your own estate plans and your own legacy ideas. So now to get a little bit more specific, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Chris Moore, who is our GIS director. And I'll give you a little of how this plays out when somebody gives me a call. Say I get a phone call from someone, and I kind of laugh about this because when property taxes roll out, the phone starts ringing, and people are anxious to figure out if they have a property they're not visiting often, or the circumstances are right for them to think about gifting it. That's when I get the phone call. And so there's not really one typical scenario, but I'll make one up of somebody has 125 acres in the Northeast Kingdom. They bought it with the intention of retiring to it and building a house on it, but they're just not going to get there. And is it something that the land trust would consider? So I take all the information from the beginning about whether there are structures on the property, if it's in current use, if it's next to a road, if it's got any wildlife attributes, if there's water close by, the reason why they're wanting to consider a gift. And I send an email to Chris and I say, Chris, take a look at this and tell me if it's something that we should move forward with. And so, Chris, what do you look at when I send you this information, which hopefully also has the address and the owner's name so that you can look at the grant list?
Yeah, thanks, Krista. And so I'm the GIS director, which really means I make maps. We have software that's, you think about Google Maps with lots of additional information. Can use that software and like Krista said, do an initial analysis of where the land's located spatially, so within a neighborhood or a town or the state, and then what is it? What's there other than acres? So we want to see if there's other conserved land nearby. We look for the road frontage. We look if there's other resources, like Krista said, what's there for streams or rivers. All of these are data sets that we can access through the mapping software and do an initial analysis. We also look and just see what's going on the property. Is it open land? Is it farms? Is it forested? Is there a house lot? all of this with an eye toward what could it be used for in the future. So Krista mentioned we sometimes get land gifts that are residential lots in fairly urban areas, as far as that goes for Vermont. There's not anybody going to farm on it. There's not going to be forestry happening on it, but they're really valuable gifts for us. So trying to do that initial analysis. We also get, as Krista said, larger gifts. We had one recently where we've actually sold it to a couple who are going to be starting farming on it. And it was a great outcome for everybody. The other part is really just a more in-depth analysis of kind of the ecological features of the property. So you can tell if it's open or forested. There's data sets that the state of Vermont produced, our conservation partners produced, that kind of indicate rare and endangered species in terms of plants, natural communities. And if this turns into a land gift that we would conserve, then sometimes those get additional protections in the easement. So all of that information comes together, thinking about what we would do with it, how we would use it if we acquired the gift. And then I just create a series of maps for Krista. And sometimes those are PDFs, sometimes those are web-based maps, and report back and just give that first analysis, what I found, how I think we could deal with it. And then Krista takes it from there.
So at that point, I take what Chris says, and it can be a broad, enthusiastic, this looks great, or it can be, I don't know about this, needs more investigation, or probably we should pass on this one. Chris, can you give me, I'm going to put you on the spot, but give me an idea of some of the ones we've passed on. Let's share with people like things that we thought were not good candidates for us to accept.
Sure. Usually the ones we pass on are smaller in acreage and combined with very difficult access to the property. So maybe it's only an acre or two, which sometimes we take because they would be a good place to sell to someone who may be thinking of moving to Vermont and setting up a tiny house. But perhaps there's no access. There's steep streams and steep road banks to get on the property. The property itself is very steep, and the acreage just isn't such that we could put a conservation easement. That's the most common one that we say no to. Similarly, there's going to be parcels of land that are, very, very, very remote, and also small in acreage, or very steep, the tops of mountains, things like that would just be a little complicated for us to take as a land gift and a little complicated for us to conserve. But those are really the big things. It's access and topography of the parcel.
Super. Thank you for that. So now I'm going to run in the other direction. And when I get either 2 thumbs up or even 1 thumb up, or just like, let's do more investigation, I take this information and I share it with the project director in the region. And so, Donald, you and I have done this a few times where I've sent those maps to you and said, can I have your help with this? Could you do a site visit? So can you explain to me what that looks like on your end? Like, when you approach a property, what are you looking for? What's in your mind for future uses, and how it could be an effective and worthwhile gift for us?
Yeah, sure. There are, again, many layers of interest that can come up. The work that Chris does is super important because it identifies known layers, things like topography and soils and whatnot. But what might not show up on a map like that is something like community priorities. So it might be that a community really wants to get a park going in a certain area, or it might be that there's a trail effort that's kind of brewing but hasn't really gotten off the ground yet. There might be a natural area that's being created, those kinds of things. And so my first lens is, how does this fit into the established community priorities. Might this be a trailhead? Might this be a particularly important gateway project that really sets the tone of a community? And look at the things that might not show up in a GIS layer. Similarly, we are a conservation organization. If somebody offers us 10 acres, 10 beautiful acres, and putting a house on it would just be horrible, we don't want to be in that situation. We don't want to be in the situation where we are the developers. We're a conservation organization. And so it's possible that somebody might offer us a small parcel of land that really would only be suitable for development, but we might not want to be part of facilitating that. We might not want to be part of seeing it get developed. Likewise,
I really love.
Go ahead.
I want to interrupt for a second and just say that's one of the pieces that I love about having the project directors we have around the state and the community and local knowledge that you have, sort of boots on the ground, and you live in these communities and you know these people and you know these initiatives. So that's a really important, I want to highlight how important that is.
Right. So if we're working in a town like Rupert, for example, where we accepted, a land gift, and Rupert has Merck Forest in it, which is a wonderful nonprofit that everybody should go visit if you ever want to go hiking. And that is a conserved property, although it's also a nonprofit of its own. But the town of Rupert, because of Merck Forest and a number of other farmland conservation projects we've done, is more than 25% conserved. So a lot of land has been conserved in Rupert.
Wow.
And when this land gift was offered to us, it was in downtown Rupert. A part of it was in the zoning district that was zoned for high density development. And I knew from my time in my years in Rupert that there was quite a lot of questions about where are people going to live. We don't want to over conserve our town so that people don't have a place to live. So before we accepted the land gift, we went to the planning commission and the select board. But really, we worked with the planning commission to say, well, how serious are you about this growth area? Is this really a place you want to see houses? Some of it's steep, some of it's not. And we ended up working with the planning commission on a plan that would allow for, we actually accepted a partial gift. So we accepted a gift on the land that was inappropriate for development, higher, steeper, wooded, ecologically very significant.
Mm.
And we accepted that gift and we conserved that and resold it. And the lower land that was in the village neighborhood district, we did not accept a gift on that. And the landowner ended up selling that. And that's something that can have houses on. So
that's a really interesting point that I also want to highlight, is that people ask me all the time, oh, you work for a conservation organization, you don't support housing. And I think that's a message that we in the Vermont Land Trust especially wants to highlight, that we're not against housing, just smart housing in areas that need the housing and in areas that make sense.
Yeah, and for decades, Vermont land planning has really been based on the idea of sort of denser downtown development and more sparsely developed rural areas in between.
Right.
That's what makes Vermont feel like Vermont. And so every town interprets that slightly different through their town plans and their zoning, but we pay very, very close attention to that. Zoning, of course, is ephemeral. It can change. So it's not the be all and end all. Quite often we end up going to the community and asking them if it's in a high use zone, whether or not they would like to see it conserved. So for example, a gateway farm, beautiful farm field coming into a town, might be perfect for development, and it might be right on the edge of development, but that community might want to see it remain conserved because it sets the tone. Right. Sort of defines the edge of the community. So some of that stuff is really a lot of it is really case by case.
Right. There's a quick side question here, Donald. A person wants to know if did the land need to be subdivided when it ended up in different uses? So the gift to the land trust, I think I'm interpreting this question correctly. So a subdivision with the land trust gift at the top and the sale that it was subdivided to enable that to happen. Is that correct?
That's the way it would have had to have happened. Yeah, except for the fact that a buyer was identified that wanted to buy both parcels. So there was a buyer that was identified during the process that wanted to buy both the unconserved portion from this donor and the conserved portion from VLT. And so we were able to go through a sort of semi-subdivision in order to make that happen. Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I want to dive just for a second, or at least a piece of it. So once you've looked at the property and you deem that it's something we should move forward with, there are things like hazmat reports and title research and appraisals. And can you speak a little to that and about how long or how short a process this can take and some of the things that we find along the way, just to give folks an idea of how long it can take. So if someone came to us on the 1st of December and said they would like to make that donation by the end of the year, what's the likelihood that that could happen?
Should ask Benj this.
Yeah, Benj, you can chime in too. We haven't given you a chance to scream out yet.
It can be very fast. It can be very slow. It depends a lot on what's happening. If you want to actually consummate the gift, I would leave that to Benj to kind of answer in terms of how long does it take to actually get the whole thing through and recorded at the town office. Certainly a number of months, but
yeah, I'm happy to jump in here.
Great.
I would tell that person that's probably not likely to be accomplished within that time frame. Anything is possible, but VLT and any other land trust needs to do some due diligence to make sure that they're not buying a Superfund site, like you said, Krista, or that there's not a title issue, there's not a mortgage on the property, or some sort of, maybe the mineral rights have been sold to an oil company or something like that, so that the gift may not be suitable. So there is that period of time that the due diligence has to be done. And I think the timeline can vary quite a bit, but it's usually at least a few months and sometimes more. So it's best to plan ahead and get the process in motion as soon as possible, and then let the process unfold. Does that answer the question?
Yes, sort of.
Well, Krista, you also are asking about the actual gift of land. There are many many other forms that can take.
Yeah.
And more commonly, we don't go directly to the gift of land. I would say more commonly
we did
some sort of estate planning situation where we know it's in the will, or we know it's coming, and there's more time to kind of get ready for those things. Is that something you're going to cover?
Yeah, I think where we should leave with this is that it's variable. It's generally not fast. And I think that might be a good thing, because it's an important consideration for folks. So taking time to work their way through the gift. And then from our end, there are things like scheduling the hazardous materials inspections and time for our staff to get out on the property and look around. And I would say generally at least 6 months would be, wouldn't you say, Donald? Kind of a good guideline at 6 months.
Depends a little on what due diligence is already out there, and what's already known about the property. 6 months is probably not a bad number, but I would say, not to be defensive, but I would say compared to some of the alternatives, we can receive a gift relatively quickly. So sometimes people will come to us, as I mentioned earlier, because they want to do a gift of land, but they don't want to wait for the whole state process or the whole federal process to grind on, which can take quite a long time. I think we are in the position usually to be able to do that more quickly than most of the other entities, the government entities anyway. There are other nonprofits, as I say, that can do this, and some of them are on the call today.
I'm going to ask one more quick question about the Rupert land. There's a question about what considerations were given to the impacts of development on the adjacent conserved land, but it doesn't sound like the land was actually developed.
No, I think that's that's the hardest part. And that's the part that really has to involve people. So we met, we actually hiked that land. The planning commission and I hiked that land, tired them right out, took them up the steep part and down the ravines. And, we looked at it and really did an on-site analysis of where there were a couple of high spots that would have been really big estate houses. But if you put a house up there, it would have been looking down over the town of Rupert, the sort of lords of the valley kind of looking down over the town of Rupert. And everyone was pretty much able to agree that would have been really, would have really changed the feel of that community. And so they were able to say, oh yeah, we definitely don't want to see development up here. And we went down a little lower. And that area had gotten out of the Oak Hickory Hop Hornbeam Forest, which was a sort of natural area that we really wanted to see protected, and was more in the toe of the slope that was heading out, and there was some sugar making going on and some tapping and whatnot. And we're kind of like, well, we'd love to see this stay a sugar bush. And so we worked with them on figuring out where the line was to kind of keep productive forest, keep sugaring going. But look at the lower areas that were closer to flat and closer to the roads. So I'm not giving you a very binary answer here, but I would say that's the point at which you have to really engage with the community on what they really mean in their town plans and in their town visions.
There's a question about, can the property have a mortgage on it and be donated to the land trust? And I'm going to take a stab at this, where we haven't had a donation come to us that has a mortgage on it. We have typically, it's already been paid off. I think it would depend on how much is still owed on the property and what the net proceeds would be after paying the mortgage off, after relinquishing that debt. So that's I wouldn't say no, but it would be something we'd have to consider on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so let's move along. Next, we should talk about who might consider gifting their land and why. And as I mentioned a little bit back, that property taxes come out and people are reconsidering what they've got. Donald also mentioned in some of the opening statements, people who maybe don't have heirs, have a second home in Vermont, or maybe are downsizing and choosing to move to something smaller. I've seen a variety of scenarios over time. Would any of you like to add in, sort of flesh out what you've seen or experienced in the last, or in your time with land gifts? Scenarios. I can certainly build some things out, but you're thinking of anything specific? I'll pull up a gift we received about 7 or 8 years ago. A couple living in upstate New York had bought a property in the Northeast Kingdom, and they were planning to retire on the property, a large forest tract that they were just thrilled to own. And as time crept by, they never did site their house on the property and realized that they weren't ever going to move to Vermont, that they're pretty situated where they were in New York. So they approached us about that gift. It moved pretty quickly because it was exactly what Vermont needs: more intact, large tract forest parcels. The owners were delighted that we accepted it, and they simply gifted it to us. And we were able to find a subsequent owner who wanted to maintain it as a timber property. So it has never been developed. We did put a conservation easement on it. So it has a bright and happy future, and not just for the donors accomplishing their wishes. They're to both preserve a big chunk of the state of Vermont, but also to help financially boost additional conservation work for the future. So it's just a win-win-win. That's one type of scenario. Another scenario that I've experienced is a couple who have a property, but children who have moved out of Vermont and are no longer interested in the land here, have a deep conviction to the natural communities around them, and decided that the Vermont Land Trust would be the best steward for the disposition of that property. And one of the things they trusted in us, it was a conserved property, conserved during their lifetime. One of the pieces that really helped them decide to gift the land to us, a complex situation that evolved, and I'll bring Benj in for a second about the estate planning, but they knew that as conservation partners, we would be looking for buyers who would bring that same ethos to the property, to bring as much love and care in the stewardship of that property ongoing as they had devoted during their lifetime. So it freed them from having to find new owners, from doing the marketing, from burdening their children with the problems of doing that. So that was a big help for them. In another scenario, a woman with a very similar situation came to me with a complex idea of, I want to give you the bulk of the land, but I want to give my son 5 acres in the house, and can we subdivide it? And it was all getting very complicated. Zoning didn't allow a 5-acre subdivision, and so as we got deeper into the conversation, she said, well, I don't know why I want to give it to him anyway. He lives out in California and he's just going to sell it. And this light bulb went off, and I said, well, just because it's coming to us as a gift doesn't mean we're not willing to work with partners, and we can divide the proceeds and give to your stepson the component that you would like him to benefit from this sale. So I would, that creative thinking and knowing your options, sometimes those conversations just have to play out a little bit and talk about the various accomplishments you'd like to achieve through the gift and who you want to benefit. Really important to think about yourself first, your heirs, and then what sort of good in the world you'd like to do. So this sort of segues into our estate planning piece and why people do this. Benj, do you have anything? Have you had any experiences that could round this out even more, or people should really be thinking about when they make considerations like this?
Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of estate planning considerations that people have. Taxes are always a big issue on people's minds. And whenever I talk about taxes, I need to make clear that, I can't give any tax advice. Everyone's situation is different. So some people have to worry about estate taxes, others don't. It can be very complicated. But in general, there should be a tax deduction for donating land during your lifetime. If you donate it as through your will or a trust at your death, that would not be subject to estate tax. So you often have people who maybe they have heirs or maybe they don't, but they don't want to, they'd like to see as much of their estate as possible go to what they consider their priorities, and that's often not the government. So so it's, everyone makes their own choices and has their own views on that, but it's certainly common to see people who maybe they had a good year in business and they want to make a donation that year to offset some taxes, and now is the right time to just donate a piece of land during their lifetime. Maybe they have the size of their estate is such that they want to have some go to charity, go to conservation organizations, and some go to their heirs. So it's a good discussion to have with your financial advisor and your attorney, and just think about what are the most efficient ways to deal with my property.
Can we talk about the real specifics of what is deductible when you donate a piece of land? It's up to 30% of your adjusted gross income, correct? With a carryover period?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit on, there are a lot of rules, and I think it's probably too much to get into all the specifics, but typically you would be entitled to to a percentage of your income. And so if it's a relatively small gift, the entire value may be deductible. You typically need to get an appraisal. So you have to have an independent appraiser come. You can't just say, well, I think my land is worth $1 million. You get an appraisal done and that establishes it. And then, because VLT is a 501c3 organization, you would qualify for that deduction.
Terrific.
Krista, can I just jump in for a second?
I'd love for you to jump in.
I feel like it's worth just not hiding the ball here, and saying if people are interested in donations, I don't think we've seen very many of these that are. There may be a very few cases where you can financially justify it because it puts you in a different tax bracket or something else.
Yeah.
But it's not. If what's driving your interest in this was financial, it's probably not a good reason to do it.
Yeah.
So there are benefits that Ben just talked about, and there's kind of some really nice perks and some really nice incentives. But most of the land gifts that we get come because people have an emotional attachment to land, and that they love that land for one reason or another, or the community loves the land, and they want to be part of seeing that land cared for. But there are a lot better ways to make money off of the land than to take a tax deduction. It's not even a credit, it's a deduction. So it's it's a relatively modest financial benefit, not insignificant, but not the same as selling your land or something like that. So sorry, my 2 cents on.
I think that's a super valuable contribution, Donald. And I don't think in the 12 years that I've been here, I've ever encountered a gift like this that was done for pure financial reasons, or there's definitely a legacy component involved where it met the donor's values and completed a philosophical idea of what they wanted to contribute to the state and to Vermonters and future generations. That's a really important piece. Someone is asking if VLT ever keeps the title to the property and manages it as open space. And if we sell with a conservation easement on it, can the easement require that it be kept as forever wild, allowing for passive public access, but no timber harvesting, motorized vehicles, or established trails?
We do have some examples. I don't know, Chris, do you want to talk about Bucked at all, or should I mention that as a potential example?
Yeah, so we have so the first part of the question, the answer is yes. Our office in Woodstock at the King Farm was on property that was donated to VLT in late 80s, early 90s. We still own it. It gets a ton of community use. There's a trail system. It abuts the national park in Woodstock. School groups use it, community gardens. We still own that one. Donald referenced a property in Cambridge, Vermont, which is a couple thousand acres, combination of forest land and farms. We own that. It's leased to a farmer. There's a lot of work with the school system in that part of the state. Sells stuff, wholesale vegetables as well. So definitely there are properties that we keep that were donated to us initially.
Thank you.
It's probably worth saying that we're not like the trustees of reservation, though, or some other conservation entity that owns a lot of properties. We have, a handful, half a dozen, maybe 8 or something like that we right now that we kind of keep and that we maintain. So it's a relatively small number of properties that we do that with, and they're relatively special properties.
So let's move on and talk about ways to accomplish these gifts. You can donate the gift during your lifetime. You can donate a gift of land or real estate in your will or trust through a bequest, the bargain sale option. And then there's also an option, a couple of other options where if you'd like to remove your property from your estate, but continue to live there. And Donald alluded to that. It's called a life estate, giving the land trust a remainder interest in the property. And there's also an option, which we haven't experienced, but people with a property that isn't producing income or they're not using it can put the property into a charitable trust, and then it can be sold and generate income for the donor over their lifetime. And then when they pass away, the remainder in that trust goes to beneficiaries, charitable beneficiaries. So it becomes a question of, do I want to use this property for my lifetime? Should I give it away now? And is it possible to make partial gifts? Benj, can you speak to some of this a little bit about, have you had conversations with clients that have decidedly, what considerations do they need to make about when to make the gift and how to structure it?
Sure. I mean, I think it really depends on people's specific situations and wishes. And sometimes you encounter people who, they want to have the satisfaction of having the gift made now, getting it done. They don't want to leave it to their executor, their trustee to try to complete that gift. And so, or there's a tax reason to do it now rather than later. So you often see a transaction where it's just a donation of land through a deed, the same way that you would sell real estate. You're just donating it instead. A lot of people want to sort of hang on to their assets because they're not sure what they might need for their health care, and they just don't know quite what they'll have left when their time is up. And so they would just put it in their will or trust. And I talk to a lot of clients about the best way to accomplish that. I think with a donation like this, setting up a trust is a really good idea, because then it can pass without going through probate. It makes a much simpler transition process upon your death for the property to just go to your designated beneficiaries. And you can also have, we've talked about situations where people want some of the land to be conserved, some to go to their heirs. You can spell that all out in a trust agreement, and then it just makes things much easier for your kids or whoever you set up as your executors or trustees. So that's a really good way to do it.
One of the ideas that's recently come up is people who want to make the gift, make the plan, but also want to have a little reassurance if they need that income. Say they become ill later in life and they have this financial resource. Is there a way, I'm leading toward the enhanced life estate deed and giving people that option. Can you talk a little about that?
Right. So there are many ways to make a gift that's effective upon your death, but you can still change your mind if you have to. So a trust would be one way to do that. You can set up a revocable trust that provides for a donation or a disposition of property. But if your circumstances change, you can always make that, change the terms of your trust. Or you can, if you had to, let's say you have a piece of property you were planning on donating, but you have a sudden financial need, you still would have the right to sell that property and use the proceeds for your own use. Mm-hmm. And the enhanced life estate deed that you mentioned is another way of accomplishing a gift upon your death. So you deed it to a beneficiary. That could be a person or it could be an organization. You deed it, but you retain the right to sell that property if you have to. So the transfer only occurs upon your death. Mm-hmm. And so that way you have that flexibility, and you can always, adjust if things change. If you make the outright donation, you just deed it today, it's gone. You can't get it back. So that works for some people, but some people need to have that, those options.
Right. I'm going to jump back a second to the life estate. Earlier in the program, an individual asked what the benefit is for the person who's remaining to live on the property. And I'm going to very superficially say the benefit is that they get to remain on their property and enjoy that property for their lifetime, knowing that it has a solidified outcome when they pass away. So they may be in love with the property and not want to leave it during their lifetime, but at a point when they feel they can no longer handle it, they are assured that it's coming to the land trust. And while they're living there, they're continuing to pay all the upkeep. So it's as though they still own it, but have this partnership with the land trust for the outcome. And in some cases, properties need to be, the estate might be large enough that they want the property out of the estate before their lifetime, just to have peace of mind that it's done. And that's one angle about why life estates work. Benj, do you have anything to add to that?
I just want to, this is maybe a technical point or a technical issue, but we've talked about life estates and enhanced life estates, and I just want to make clear the difference between those. I think the first example you gave was where the property was donated and the donor retained a life estate, which means that they have the right to live there, but upon their death, the property is no longer theirs, and it's done. The enhanced life estate is where you donate the property, but it's subject to change during your lifetime. So you could decide that you really want to sell the property and keep the proceeds. So those are two different types of transfers you can make. And this is the type of thing I would talk about with the client if they wanted to know their options for donating, but the terminology can get confusing. So it's important to just be, get solid advice on that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you clarified those two situations. That can be confusing, and it's good to know. Well, we are 3 minutes away from the top of the hour, and we have only an hour to share. I didn't ask ahead of time if the three of you could hang on for another 5 minutes or so if we have additional questions. That they're not, it looks like we've been able to answer everything in the Q&A.
Krista, I did throw an answer in there to a good question about Forever Wild. So that's in the Q&A if people want to read that. Again, I would direct people probably to our partners that do more of that than we do. We're more of a working lands organization. And then secondly, there was a question back there about if you donate land, do you also have to donate an endowment for that land? And many organizations do require that. So, up in Cape Breton, for example, we own some land. We tried to donate it to the land trust up there, and they said, well, okay, but you have to give us $20,000 worth of too. And we weren't in a position to do that. So, but BLT, for the most part, if we accept a land gift, we do not require an endowment to come with it. So we might not accept the gift if we're unable to cover our costs with it. But if we accept the gift, we generally don't require an endowment to go with it. When people conserve their land, they usually help us with the cost of conserving that land, but that's different from a gift of land.
And there is a project that we've been working on in the last couple of years where we got a very generous contribution of a property, of nearly 500-acre property, and a camp. And the donor wants to see ongoing programmatic work where we collaborate with partners, we make the property open to the public, and it's adding a huge amount of capacity or demand on our capacity over time to build out programs that we hadn't originally been doing. That person is very graciously endowing all of that work. So it's a window into something that could happen, but it isn't necessarily a requirement. And that's where I think these conversations ahead of the gift and talking about your vision and idea and the legacy you want to leave is so very important.
There was also a question in there, a specific question about 250 acres. And I would say, give us a call. Anyone at VLT would be willing to talk you through that question. And the answer is very much dependent on that particular parcel of land and looking at maps and trying to figure out what the details of it are. A lot of these things get down to the details quickly.
Right. Very quickly, how do you coordinate with property in current use? We deal with current use all the time. It's not difficult. So I'll just leave that one there. That's a good question. Can you talk with one of us directly to discuss the situation? Absolutely. The VLT people are at vlt.org, and Benj is at, I'll follow up with these contact information after the call. And then enhanced life estate, can you donate your land to VLT through your will or charitable trust? Yet if you find someone or an organization you'd like to give the land to before you die, you're allowed to do that. So can you change beneficiaries with an enhanced life estate?
Yes, the answer is yes. You can always change your mind with the enhanced life estate. It's only if you actually deed the property, directly to the land trust that you wouldn't be able to change your mind.
Okay.
Krista, if I could just jump in, I know we're over time, but I want to say the most common way that I see this get used, and what I think is most helpful to landowners, is the ability to put it in their will as a safety net. So to say, I don't know if I have all the answers yet. I don't know exactly what my heirs want. I just don't know what the future holds. But if I die tomorrow, if I'm in a truck accident, I don't want my land just to go off into probate and get chopped up, with lawyers' fees. I want it to go to the land trust, and then that sits in your will, and it's a safety net, so that if something does happen to you, you know that the land trust will take care of the land and take care of its future disposition. But you can always change it. So if things change within your family structure, and if things change with your heirs, or change for you financially, you can go back and change your will and make that different. Now, I know that's probably not what Krista wants me to say.
Oh no,
I love gifts of land, but that's the way I see it used most often. Is people use it in their will. It's very inexpensive to put in your will, and very very nice kind of safety net to have if you really care about your land.
agreed. So I think I'll go back through the Q&As. I think there's only one about a question about public access. And that's a specific question we'll answer another time. At this time, I want to close out this session. I want to thank you. We have covered so much ground, information-packed hour. And I would love to just pause for a second and ask you to consider what it was that drew you to Vermont, why Vermont's so special to you, what sorts of information on this call spoke to you. And if you have any questions and you want to carry on a conversation with an individual beyond that, you'll reach out and talk to us. Land gifts, if it works for you, are a profound way to leave a legacy with your own values, your own philosophy, and to help protect the state that we all love. So thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Bye, everybody.